The evening sun slid low over the small coastal town, throwing long amber streaks across Main Street. A warm breeze carried the faint, briny scent of the harbor and the lazy rhythm of gulls overhead. It should have been an ordinary Saturday, the kind where neighbors waved from porch swings and the corner cafe clinked with coffee cups. But the sound that broke the calm wasn't laughter or conversation. It was the deep, snarling growl of motorcycle engines. 4 of them, chrome and black steel, rolled down the narrow street in a tight formation. Their exhaust rattled shop windows and sent a hush rippling through pedestrians. People paused mid-step, instinctively edging back to the sidewalks as the riders slowed. The lead bike's pipes popped like distant gunfire before the pack braked hard in front of the crosswalk. From the opposite curb, Evelyn Harris waited with a canvas grocery bag looped over her arm. She was in her late 60s, silver hair pinned neatly under a straw sun hat, a soft cardigan buttoned despite the lingering warmth. She had the unhurried grace of someone who'd lived long enough to ignore the world's hurry. When the walk signal blinked green, she stepped from the curb. The bikers saw her immediately. Their helmets gleamed. Mirrored visors reflected the fading light like predatory eyes. Instead of easing forward or stopping respectfully, the lead rider throttled just enough to lurch ahead a few feet, an unmistakable taunt. The others fanned slightly across the crosswalk, engines rumbling a low challenge. Evelyn paused mid-lane. Her heart thumped, but her face remained composed. She adjusted the grocery bag higher on her arm, her gaze fixed straight ahead as if the riders were nothing more than a summer breeze. Shoppers clustered near the storefronts, whispering. A young couple exchanged nervous glances. Someone pulled out a phone, but hesitated to record. No one stepped forward. The lead biker finally flipped up his visor. A face of stubble and swagger grinned back at her. "Evenin', Grandma," he drawled, voice dripping mock politeness. "Need a ride across?" The others laughed, sharp and cruel. One rider revved his throttle until the engine howled. Another leaned sideways, boots scraping the asphalt in an exaggerated mock bow. Evelyn kept walking, each step deliberate. From a side street, a figure approached unnoticed by most. Frank Harris, Evelyn's husband of 42 years, walked with the slow steadiness of someone who carried time like a well-worn coat. His jeans were faded, his jacket a simple canvas field coat that had seen decades of weather. His hair, more silver than black now, peeked from beneath a baseball cap embroidered with nothing more than a small, faded eagle. He'd been on his way from the hardware store, a bag of screws, and a new porch light in hand. At first he thought the traffic light had simply stalled. Then he heard the jeers. Frank's eyes narrowed. He adjusted his pace. Not rushing, but with a quiet purpose that made the closest bystanders instinctively shift to give him room. As Evelyn reached the halfway point of the crosswalk, the lead biker eased forward again, tires creeping inches from her shoes. Frank's voice cut across the engine noise, low but carrying. "That's enough." The riders turned as one. The leader tilted his helmeted head, visor still up. "And who's going to make it enough?" "You." A ripple of laughter followed, louder this time. One of the younger bikers barked, "Careful, old man, don't throw out a hip." Frank stopped a single pace behind Evelyn, his hands loose at his sides. He was taller than most had noticed at first, broad-shouldered beneath the plain jacket, posture straight as a rifle barrel. His gaze locked on the leader with a calm that felt older and heavier than the moment. "Move your bikes," he said evenly. "Now." The leader's grin widened. "Or what? You'll knit us a sweater?" Another burst of laughter. One rider rocked his bike forward a foot, the front tire nudging dangerously close. "Scary stuff, Pops," he sneered. Around them, the street fell into a charged stillness. The evening breeze seemed to pause. A child's cry from across the square was quickly hushed. Every eye followed the quiet standoff in the crosswalk. The elegant woman, the 4 roaring machines, and the old man who stood like a rooted tree. Frank didn't move. His breathing stayed even. Only those closest might have noticed the faint shift of his weight onto the balls of his feet, the way his eyes tracked each rider's hands, each clutch lever and brake line, as if cataloging a battlefield. The leader finally snorted. "You're brave for a relic," he said, twisting the throttle. The engine snapped like a whip. "But I'd hate for you to fall." Frank's expression didn't change. He simply stepped half a pace forward, his voice a quiet command that somehow cut through the roar. I said, "Move them now." The engines rumbled in answer, an animal growl beneath the twilight sky. Then the leader's smile turned from amusement to something colder. The leader's grin lingered for a heartbeat, then flattened into a hard line. He twisted the throttle again, the engine's growl rising until the pavement trembled. One of his companions barked a short laugh and leaned his bike forward, letting the front tire bump lightly against Frank's boot. Frank didn't flinch. A low murmur rippled through the bystanders. Someone whispered, "Call the cops," but no one moved for a phone. The air itself seemed to tighten. The second biker, a wiry man with tattoos spiraling down both arms, sneered, "Grandpa, you're the wrong decade. Walk away before you get hurt." Frank's eyes never left the leader. His voice came slow and measured, every syllable cutting clean through the noise. I said it once. "Move the bikes. Last chance." The leader leaned forward on his handlebars. "You think you're scaring us? You're one step from a nursing home." He reached down as if to gun the throttle again. Frank shifted, barely a breath of motion, but suddenly the quiet old man wasn't quiet at all. His stance widened, knees soft, shoulders squared. It was subtle, but the kind of subtle that speaks of drills and muscle memory, of years when such a stance meant life or death. The biker closest to Frank laughed nervously and revved again, a thin attempt to break the strange stillness. Then he lunged. It happened so fast, most people didn't understand what they'd seen. Frank sidestepped, one hand snapping out to catch the biker's wrist. A twist, a pivot of the hips, and the man was suddenly bent forward, his arm locked behind him. The bike wobbled, engine sputtering. Frank's other hand shot to the handlebars, killing the ignition with a flick that seemed effortless. Gasps broke from the crowd. The next biker tried to dismount, swinging a leg over his seat. Frank released the first man with a push that sent him stumbling backward and turned in the same motion. His elbow drove upward, sharp, controlled, catching the second biker square in the chest. The man staggered, his own weight dragging him off balance until he hit the asphalt with a metallic clatter. Engines still roared around them, but the scene felt frozen. Frank stood centered, breathing steady, eyes scanning like radar. The leader finally kicked down his stand and stepped off his bike, jaw tight. "You've got some nerve, old man." Frank's reply was calm, almost conversational. "You've had your fun. Now it's over." The leader charged. Frank waited until the last possible instant, then pivoted. His left hand caught the attacker's jacket. His right drove upward in a precise arc. A single motion flipped the bigger man clean over his own center of gravity. He landed flat on his back with a hollow thud that echoed off the storefronts. The last biker hesitated, engine still idling beneath him. For a long second, his eyes darted from his fallen friends to the quiet figure who had moved like a shadow. Then, without a word, he kicked his bike into gear and rolled backward, retreating to the curb. The silence that followed was deeper than any roar. Evelyn, who had never stepped aside, finally turned to her husband. Her voice carried just enough to reach the onlookers. "Frank," she said softly, "are you all right?" He gave a single nod. "Are you?" "I am," she answered, her composure unshaken. The leader groaned from the ground, trying to rise. Frank crouched slightly, not threatening, simply present. "Stay down until you can leave without more stupidity," he said. No one argued. Around them, the crowd began to breathe again. Phones lifted now, recording, photographing, but no one interfered. A few people clapped quietly, a ripple of more than applause. Frank straightened, his face unreadable. To the bikers, he added, "Collect your friends. Go home." The man he'd flipped to the pavement finally struggled upright, rubbing his shoulder. He met Frank's eyes, found nothing there but steady warning, and looked away. Engines sputtered back to life, one by one. Without another word, the riders eased their bikes into motion and disappeared down the street. their noise fading into the distance until only the smell of exhaust lingered. Frank exhaled slowly. The tension in the air began to thin. Evelyn adjusted her grocery bag and slipped her hand into his. "Let's finish crossing," she said. Together they walked the last few steps to the opposite curb as the crowd parted for them like water. No one dared block their path. Frank and Evelyn reached the far curb as the last echoes of motorcycle engines faded into the distance. The small crowd that had witnessed everything stood hushed, a semicircle of faces lit by the fading amber of sunset and the flicker of neon signs. Some people lowered their phones, ashamed they had filmed but not acted. Others simply stared at the quiet man who had dismantled 4 bikers in less than a minute. A boy of perhaps 12 stepped forward first, eyes wide. "Mister, that was wow." His mother pulled him back gently, whispering for silence. Frank gave the boy the smallest of nods. Nothing more. He rested a hand lightly on Evelyn's back and guided her toward a nearby bench beneath a street lamp. They sat together, their movements unhurried, as though they were merely pausing on a pleasant evening walk. The town's police cruiser arrived a moment later, lights flashing but siren off. 2 officers emerged, scanning the scene with practiced caution. "Everything all right here?" the senior officer asked, his gaze moving from the murmuring crowd to Frank and Evelyn. Frank rose, straight and calm. "Situation's handled," he said simply. They left. An older man from the hardware store stepped forward, voice trembling with leftover adrenaline. "He's not exaggerating, officer. Those bikers, well, they picked the wrong couple." The younger officer looked from Frank to the retreating taillights far down the street. "Did they hurt anyone?" "No," Frank replied, "and they won't be back tonight." The senior officer studied him for a moment, something like recognition flickering across his face. "You're Frank Harris, aren't you? I think I saw your photo at the Veterans Hall." Frank gave a polite nod. "Used to be Gunnery Sergeant Harris, United States Marine Corps. Retired a long time ago." A ripple went through the onlookers. Several people exchanged startled glances. One man whispered, "That explains it." Evelyn reached into her bag and withdrew a small tin of mints, offering one to her husband as though nothing unusual had happened. Frank accepted it with a faint smile. The officer relaxed slightly. "Well, Gunny, thank you for keeping it under control. We'll take statements if needed, but it seems you've done our job for us." Frank shook his head. "Just protecting my wife, same as any man should. No need to make a spectacle." The officers conferred briefly, then nodded and began dispersing the remaining bystanders, who moved reluctantly, casting lingering looks at the couple on the bench. When the crowd thinned, one of the shopkeepers approached, a middle-aged woman with flour on her apron. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," she said quietly. "You kept so calm. I wish I had that kind of courage." Frank's eyes softened. "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," he said. "It's about doing what needs doing, even when you're scared." The woman smiled faintly and returned to her bakery, the scent of warm bread trailing after her. Evelyn turned to her husband once the street had emptied. "You didn't have to move that fast," she said gently. "I would have been fine." Frank looked at her with a warmth that belonged to decades of shared mornings and storms. "You're my heart," he replied. "No one threatens that." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the steady hum of night insects and the distant roll of the tide. The streetlights flickered on, washing the quiet town in a soft glow. Finally, Evelyn asked, "Do you ever miss it?" "The Corps." Frank thought for a moment, eyes tracing the darkening horizon. "I miss the men I served with," he said. "The bond, the way we watched each other's backs. But the fights, no. I've had enough of those." He reached into his jacket pocket and drew out a pair of dog tags, edges worn smooth with years. "They remind me where I've been," he continued, holding them in his palm so the lamplight gleamed on the stamped metal. "Every choice I make now, it's to honor the people who didn't get to come home." Evelyn touched the tags gently, her fingers brushing the cold steel. "And tonight, Frank said, I protected what matters most. Same mission, different battlefield." She smiled, the quiet pride in her eyes matching his. They rose together, Evelyn's hand finding his as naturally as breath, and began the slow walk home through streets that now seemed almost reverent. Behind them, the hardware store owner locked up for the night, pausing to watch the couple disappear into the glow of the street lamps. He shook his head in quiet awe. Some stories, he thought, would travel through the town faster than any biker ever could. As they turned the final corner toward their house, the cool night breeze carried the distant echo of the sea and the faint metallic clink of the dog tags in Frank's pocket, a sound like memory itself. Before stepping inside, Frank looked up at the sky, a scatter of stars just beginning to pierce the darkness. In a voice meant only for Evelyn, but strong enough for the night to hear, he said, "I fought wars so punks like that could live free. That doesn't give them the right to disrespect what I love." Evelyn squeezed his hand. "They know better now." He nodded once, and together they entered their quiet home, leaving the street behind, but carrying with them a lesson every witness would remember. Hours later, when neighbors spoke of the incident, they agreed on one thing. The bikers had chosen the wrong couple, and the quiet veteran had reminded everyone that true strength doesn't fade. It simply waits for the moment it's needed. And for those who had watched, it was a story they would tell again and again, a living reminder that valor often walks softly until the day it must stand.